Pedestrians walking by it say they feel an aura of foreboding. Yet the Dakota Building is an iconic landmark that has become one of the most sought-after private residences in New York City. The building was constructed between 1880 and 1884. In the years following the close of the Civil War, New York City experienced an upsurge in population and a need for housing. Edward Clark, an attorney and entrepreneur who had made his fortune from the Singer Sewing Company, saw an investment opportunity where others just saw dirt. In December 1877, he purchased a plot on the barren wastelands on the Upper West Side and commissioned Henry Janeway Hardenbergh, the firm behind the Plaza Hotel, to design a luxurious building that felt more like a family hotel than a brownstone. By 1880, construction on the Dakota was commencing. Influenced by Clark's extensive travels around Europe, the building's architecture displays a mix of German Renaissance motifs, buff brick exteriors, terracotta spandrels and freestone trimmings, as well as a French-inspired interior courtyard. The layout of the building also draws from popular French styles of the period: tall ceilings, long rooms, and an enfilade-style floor plan. Nowadays, it is difficult to imagine a desolate Central Park West without the skyscrapers, desperately fast pace, and lots of people. But back in the 1890s, things were a lot different. In fact, the Dakota, located at 1 West 72nd Street and Central Park West, is rumored to have gotten its name because Manhattan's Upper West Side at that time appeared equally as empty as the Dakota Territory. Another theory suggests that Edward Clark chose the name Dakota because of his affection for the western states. A statue of a Dakota Indian standing above the 72nd Street entrance lends support to this idea. Clark and Hardenbergh decided to market a before unheard of lifestyle to attract the wealthy to the newly constructed building. Before the Dakota, rich New Yorkers had always lived in houses with their servants because apartments were associated with poor people and cramped, unsanitary conditions. With this exciting new building, New Yorkers had the opportunity to rent apartments with all the amenities of a hotel. Tenants had the choice to dine in the full-service dining room or have meals delivered directly to their room via a dumb waiter. The other now lost amenities were a playroom and a gym on the 10th floor, and a tennis and croquet court behind the building. Instead of servants, the Dakota had a full housekeeping staff, including maids, janitors, laundresses, and elevator operators. The staff's responsibilities range from delivering coal and firewood to apartment stoves and fireplaces, and then collecting the ashes. There were so many staff that Hardenbergh designated the top 2 floors as housekeepers' quarters. The concept was risky, but brilliant. The elite of New York took to it immediately, and within no time at all, the Dakota was completely occupied. The permanent hotel boasted a total of 65 suites, with 4 to 20 rooms each, 8 elevators and 9 floors. Rooms, no 2 of which were alike, were outfitted in marble floors, rich mahogany woodwork, and electric lighting, making it one of the first large-scale residences to offer such a provision. The German exterior includes a grand 20-foot-tall arched and covered entryway that sheltered tenants as they disembarked from their horse-drawn carriages. There are 3 other entrances that also all connect to the private courtyard. The French-style interior is unlike the interior of other New York City apartment buildings. Some of the rooms in the residences are up to 50 feet long, and most have 14-foot-high ceilings. One similarity is that originally the master bedrooms and parlors look out towards the street, while the kitchen and remaining rooms look out towards the courtyard. Unlike many of New York City's older buildings, the Dakota has largely remained how Clark and Hardenbergh envisaged it, aside from a few modern renovations and the switch from rent to cooperative housing. In the days of horse-drawn carriages, shelter was needed for these hard-working animals. The building was well equipped for their needs. They were accommodated in a large 2-section stable with multiple stories. Once horses were superseded by the automobile, the stables were converted into a garage and used as such until 2007. Later, the impressive building was transformed into a condominium. Inside, the floor plans of the apartments were influenced strongly by the architectural trends going on in France. Across every apartment, all major rooms connected to the others. These rooms are also accessible from a nearby corridor or hall. This arrangement is perfect for hosting dinner parties, as it allows tenants and their guests to graduate from one room to another in the course of the evening. Also, the principal entertaining rooms in all apartments faced an external street. Oddly, this includes most master bedroom suites, which subjects the sleeper to traffic noise. Of course, back when the Dakota was built, it was as quiet as the grave. The apartments could be aired from 2 different sides, allowing for a healthy airflow. At the time, this type of layout was a novelty for Americans. Rare at the time, there was also central heating, also the aforementioned gymnasium and playroom. These communal spaces on the 10th floor were later converted to even more apartments. The building's original owner, Edward Clark, was an avid spiritualist and would often host seances in the Dakota to communicate with the dead. Over the passage of decades, some of the former residents and the seance-invited dead have chosen the Dakota as the place to be seen, sometimes. It's not altogether surprising that a few wraiths are gliding gracefully through the elegant Dakota, because this is New York after all. There's a lot of life being lived by a lot of people. All those millions of New Yorkers have to die somewhere, and the Dakota building has had its own share of deaths, some of them involving famous people. Let me present to you a few of the former tenants who have chosen to linger on. Joe Mielzner was an accomplished Broadway set designer, famous for the sets for many popular plays, like Death of a Salesman. He passed away in the street just outside the building. He was in a cab and suffered a heart attack in the back seat, gasping his last breaths with the darkly elegant facade looming over him. Some residents have reported seeing him and a number of other spectres, smiling, crying and laughing, and even greeting people as they pass in the hallways. For several weeks after Joe's death, strange things went on in the building's cavernous basement. Wilbur Ross, a banker who had an apartment there, was summoned to the basement by a frightened porter, who reported that a heavy snow shovel, which had been hanging properly against a wall, had all at once flung itself 20 feet across the room and landed in the middle of the floor. Later, neatly stacked plastic bags of garbage that had been waiting to go out by the service door also flew into the center of the room. Other people have seen a man who resembles Edward Cabot Clark, the developer of the building, once again in the basement. However, Clark himself never lived in the building. Perhaps it is indeed his spirit that haunts the basement of the Dakota to this day, keeping an eye on the fate of his building. One of the most frequently sighted spirits is a woman seen walking the hallways, weeping gently. It is said that this woman could be Elise Vesley. She was the property manager of the Dakota from the 30s to the 50s. Elise suffered a tremendous amount of grief while residing at the Dakota, after her young son was killed by a passing truck right outside the building. The Dakota was the last place Elise saw her son alive, and even after her own death, she still cries for him, searching the halls in vain. One of the residents living below a vacant apartment would often hear screams in the night and a heavy object being dragged across the floor. Caretakers who afterwards inspected the apartment said there was no signs of any activity, but they did report feeling a strange coldness and an intense feeling of being watched. we find more reports of ghostly activity at the Dakota Apartments in the 1960s. A construction worker who was inside the building stated he saw a figure with the body of a man but the face of a young boy. Is Elisa's son also still wandering the halls, searching for his mother? Coinciding with the death of another famous resident, Judy Holliday, the construction workers also felt like they were being closely watched. Or perhaps they were just being too loud and had upset the spiritual status quo. Residents also claimed to have seen a little girl dressed in clothing from another era, waving and smiling from several lower windows. The girl wears a taffeta yellow dress and patent leather shoes, and makes herself known to the workers in the building. She cheerfully informed the men of her birthday, then headed down the hall and disappeared. She plays with a red ball and bounces it down the halls of the apartment building. Later, a woman who was waiting for a friend in the building's foyer saw the same blonde girl go into what she thought at the time was a room, but later discovered was only a closet. Roman Polanski filmed Rosemary's Baby in 1966. In 1965, when the employees were setting up to film some scenes in apartment 77, they encountered the ghost of a boy who looked to be about 10. The boy was walking up and down the hallway in old-fashioned clothing, and the hall had suddenly developed a strange and musty odor that the employees could not identify. This boy was seen on many other occasions after that. The crew for Rosemary's Baby immediately regretted filming the movie there. Shortly after wrapping up the final scenes, the crew began to experience bizarre events. Christoph Komeda fell into a coma in an odd coincidence that reflected the book. Producer William Castle's bad luck came next with a serious case of kidney stones. While he was in hospital recovering, he had frightening visions about the movie. Director Roman Polanski's wife, Sharon Tate, became increasingly interested in the occult as a direct result of the movie. She was later tragically murdered by members of the Manson family. Frederick Weinstein, living in the Dakota with his wife Susanna, went on record by reporting seeing the lights of a chandelier in his living room from below on street level. He found this vision rather peculiar, as he does not have any chandeliers. However, when he ran into his apartment, there was nothing that could have caused what he saw. But upon further inspection, he did notice the plastered-over holes in the ceiling, where a chandelier had once hung long ago. This wasn't the only incident that the Weinsteins experienced either. They reportedly heard and saw many odd things during their time at the Dakota. Sometime later, he had been playing a Ouija board type game with his children, one that involved lettered tiles that spelled out answers to questions. During the course of the session, the otherworldly messages purported to be from the spirit of a little girl. When he and the children had finished with the game, Weinstein stacked the lettered tiles neatly and put them on a bookshelf. Several days later, however, he discovered that 2 of the tiles had made their way into the pockets of one of his suits. A third turned up in his glasses case. As he withdrew them, one by one, the letters were I, C, and U. This, he feels, was intended to convey to him that someone in the apartment was saying, "I see you." There have been more sinister, quite possibly paranormal events to happen in the building, which centers on one of the elevators. This elevator has had to endure continuous refurbishments, as it was being relentlessly attacked by what appeared to be knife cuts, which would allegedly appear out of thin air. The sole responsible for this property damage remains unknown to this day. The most famous ghost of them all is the one of John Lennon. John Lennon was fatally shot by a madman in front of the Dakota in 1980. Lennon's widow, Yoko Ono, has publicly stated that her husband's ghost is still there. Colleagues of Lennon and residents of the Dakota have confirmed this as well. Yoko Ono has heard his ghost speak, as she once saw the spirit of John at his white piano. He comforted her, saying, "Don't be afraid, I'm still with you." Others have reported seeing Lennon walking in front of the archway where he was shot. Before his death, Lennon had reported seeing a semi-transparent woman with curly hair walking down the halls. He described her as the Crying Lady. Tenant loyalty was also based on more powerful, almost mystical forces. The building seemed to inspire among its residents a kind of wild, irrational passion that approached religious fervor. Those who worshipped at the Dakota's altar were not just tenants, but followers, members of a sect. The Dakota, while it may never be a symbol of New York class, became a symbol of a New York cult. From the beginning, the building seemed to take on a human personality, and a quirky, almost demented one at that. One did not live at the Dakota long before it could be sensed that here was not an ordinary apartment house, but a living, breathing presence, a wild lover whose behavior could neither be explained nor predicted, but whose embrace one craved regardless. So, my dear friends, do you feel the pull of the Dakota? Does it draw you in? Can you feel the magnetic forces beckoning you? Actually, when I was doing this, I did have a longing to visit the building. I guess it will never happen because there is, I think, very strict security. And I would never be able to afford an apartment there unless I won the power jackpot. And then you'd have to get past the selective board. And I don't think Audible will match their criteria or their standards. But I would love to visit. If I had to live in New York, I'm not really a city person, but if I had to live in New York, I think the Dakota, I love old world elegance, so that would definitely be. And my apartment would have to be in the style of the era when it was built. None of this modern stuff. I'm sure some people who've lived there have modernized their apartments. Apparently the doors and the fireplaces you're not allowed to actually remove from the building. You can take them out and they are stored in the basement somewhere, the doors, because they are original to the building. So you're not allowed to just throw them away and put your own door or fireplace in, which I think is great that they're keeping an eye on the history of it. And what a shame that the other amenities in the building are no longer there. Obviously, this drive to get more money has made them convert these spaces into more apartments. But wouldn't it have been fantastic to see all the restaurant, for example? Unfortunately, it's very difficult to find interior shots of the Dakota, vintage interior shots. I have included some I've just had to, use images that would give a bit of ambience. There are many of them, but inside images, very difficult. I'd love to see more. I don't know why it's so secretive. Why we can't have some... and did they not have any historical records? I mean, pictorial records of the Dakota from back then? I can't find any. I've searched high and low. Maybe they're in some reference library somewhere in America. I would love to see them. Couldn't find them, therefore I couldn't include them in this video. I'm very sorry to say. Some of the interior ones are of the Dakota. I'm not going to label which ones are and which are not. I think it adds to the mystery, for you to guess which ones are the authentic interior shots. And if you can't afford an apartment in the Dakota building, and if you can't pass the strict admission criteria, fear not, because here you can buy a model of the Dakota building for $125. What a bargain. You can get it also in a variety of finishes. Pewter black stain, pewter brown stain, and new pewter. By the way, I'm not getting paid for this advertising. I just thought this was quite quirky. In no way am I promoting this item. I just thought it was quite amusing. Look, you can enlarge it. Let's have a look at it. There we go. Yes, all the features are there. Your very own Dakota building where you can own each and every one apartment. By the way, the passage I quoted at the end there is from a book called Life at the Dakota by Stephen Birmingham. I think I'll order this book, actually. I had a quick preview of it. You can read some of the passages from it. I think it's going to be very interesting. So I think I will splash out and get this. I see you can also get it as an audio book. He should have had me narrating it, my dear viewers. What do you think? Then again, he can't afford me. My voice is exclusively for you, my dear friends. Yes, an interesting read. I'll let you know once I've ordered it how it is, if I remember. If not, go and buy it yourself. And I'm not getting paid to advertise this, by the way. It's just a courtesy thing because I have used a passage from his book. Thank you, Mr. Birmingham. So I would be amiss if I didn't tell you about some other famous people who have lived at the Dakota and who got past the very selective board. I guess the board wasn't around back then, wasn't it? Because they were still sort of renting apartments back then. But Judy Garland lived there. Some say that she died young and it's because of the curse of the Dakota. Well, she didn't die at the Dakota. She died in England. And yeah, well, she was 47. I guess that's kind of young. Wasn't she beautiful back then? Roberta Flack lived there. I didn't know that. I think she's still there. Or is she? Roberta Flack lives there. She's lived there since 2018. So I guess she's still there. So let's see who else we have. Lauren Bacall lived there also. Wow. Been some very, very prominent people. Leonard Bernstein lived there. Who else? Maury Povich. Okay. Connie Chung. Wow. Very, very prominent neighbours you would have. Harlan Coben. Don't know him. By the way, this is from a site called fancypantshomes.com. If you want to check it out. Yeah, so that was it about the who's who living at the Dakota. There's probably been some more, and I'm sorry, dead or alive, if I've missed you out. And I nearly did miss a celebrity Dakotanian out, and it's Judy Holliday. Unfortunately died from breast cancer in the Dakota. She was only 43. She spent the last years of her life in apartment 77 after her life was tragically cut short. Painters began seeing apparitions in her former home. 2 ghosts appeared at various times, both male, and one painter even reported having his hand grabbed by a spectral visitor. No one seems to know if Holliday ever encountered these ghosts, but could it be possible her medical misfortune was yet another case of the Dakota building curse? I don't think so. I would take the Dakota building on, because I know for a fact I read some of the history and quite many residents lived to a grand old age there. So that is not true about the curse. Anyway, it's not true. So if you can afford an apartment at the Dakota, and it's very, very, very expensive, and you get past the board, the very strict board, then invite me for dinner, please. You don't even have to splash out for dinner. Just invite me for a coffee. I'd love to visit. And on that note, my dear, dear, dear friends, I'm going to go. That's it. I can think of nothing more to say. And so, until the next time, take care, God bless, and bye-bye.